I lived alone in a ground-floor apartment for 4 years. It was a converted Victorian in a mid-sized city, the kind of building that had been divided into 4 units sometime in the 70s, and you could feel the age of it in the way the rooms connected to each other, the slightly uneven floors, the window frames that had been painted over so many times they'd lost their original lines. I liked it. It had a character to it that newer buildings don't. My apartment was at the front of the building, first floor, with 2 windows facing the street and a door at the back of the kitchen that opened onto a shared exterior hallway, which then led out to the back courtyard. All tenants had keys to that back hallway. It was where the mailboxes were. I used it maybe twice a week. I was a habitual reader and a light sleeper, 2 things that go together less comfortably than people assume. I was often up past midnight and often aware of the sounds my apartment made at those hours. The building had its own nighttime vocabulary, the pipes in the walls when the upstairs neighbor showered late, the particular way the front windows flexed when trucks passed outside, the refrigerator's compressor cycling on with a low shudder. The first thing I noticed happened on a Tuesday in late winter. I was reading in bed. It was close to 1 in the morning, and I felt a draft, not the vague ambient chill of an old building, but a focused current of cold air moving across the lower half of my bed, coming from the direction of the hallway that led to the kitchen. I lowered my book and held still. The draft continued for a moment, then subsided. I got up and checked the kitchen. Both windows were shut. The back door was closed. I ran my hand along the bottom of the door frame and felt nothing unusual. I stood in the kitchen for a minute, registered nothing out of place, and went back to bed. Old buildings draft. I'd felt it before, though not quite like that. 4 nights later, the same draft, same direction, same quality, like a door had been briefly opened somewhere and the air was equalizing. This time I got up faster and went directly to the back door. Closed, locked, the deadbolt thrown. I stood there with my hand on the deadbolt and tried to think through it logically. The shared hallway on the other side of this door connected to the courtyard. If the courtyard door was open and my back door had any gap at all along the seal, I opened my back door and checked the exterior hallway. The courtyard door at the far end was closed. I walked down and tested it. Locked, as it should have been after 9 p.m. I went back to bed and lay there longer than I'd like to admit before sleep came. Over the next 3 weeks, I felt the draft 7 more times. I began documenting the time each occurrence, always between midnight and 2 in the morning. I examined my back door in full daylight. The seal was intact. I mentioned it to my upstairs neighbor, a quiet man named Philip, who said he hadn't noticed anything unusual. The other 2 units were occupied by a young couple who kept regular hours and an older woman I rarely saw. I borrowed a stick of incense from Philip and used it to check the airflow around my back door at night. The smoke moved consistently away from the door, not toward it. Whatever the draft was, it wasn't coming through the door seal. On a Thursday in late February, I woke just after 1:30, not from the draft, but from a sound. Once, a single soft click in the kitchen, like a latch catching or a door settling into a frame. I got up immediately. The back door was closed, the deadbolt was engaged, but the interior privacy chain, a secondary latch I always set before bed, was hanging loose at the door's edge. Not broken, not pulled through, simply unhooked. I stood in the kitchen in the dark and looked at that chain for a long time. I was certain I had set it. I had set it every night for 4 years. It was the last thing I did before leaving the kitchen.
I called the building manager the next morning. She took it seriously enough to contact a locksmith who examined the back door and found something I hadn't known to look for. The deadbolt mechanism had slight wear patterns on the exterior cylinder that were inconsistent with normal key use. Finer scratches, the kind associated with a pick or bump key rather than a standard cut. The lock was replaced. A new interior bolt was installed. The courtyard door had its lock rekeyed as well. Whether someone was coming in and what they were doing in my apartment while I slept, I was never definitively told. The locksmith said the wear patterns didn't prove anything conclusive on their own, only that the lock had been manipulated from outside, and more than once. I moved to the second floor when a unit opened 6 months later. I still set a chain every night. I don't think I'll ever stop. What I think about isn't the nights it happened, it's the nights I felt that draft, attributed it to old plumbing and old walls, and went back to sleep without really checking. The building knew what it was. I just wasn't listening carefully enough.
I want to tell this one in the order I understood it, not the order it happened. Because for a long time, the pieces didn't look like a pattern. They looked like minor incidents, the kind of small, disconnected things that happen when you live alone, and your mind occasionally supplies its own context. I was living in a rented house on the edge of a small town, one of those transitional properties, not quite rural, but not in the neighborhood proper either. A quarter-acre of yard, a detached garage, mature hedges along the front that blocked most of the street view. I'd been there about 14 months. The town had a local community alert service, an opt-in phone notification system that sent automated calls when there were public safety matters in the area, road closures, weather events, that kind of thing. I'd signed up during my first month and received maybe 4 or 5 calls in the year since. They came from a specific number I'd saved in my phone as town alerts. In October, I started receiving calls from that number at odd hours. The first one came at 11:40 at night. I was still awake, so I answered. The recording was the standard automated voice, but the message was unusual, a notification about a community meeting that had already taken place 2 weeks prior. I assumed there'd been a system error and didn't follow up. The second call came 4 nights later, just past midnight. Same automated voice. This time, the message was a weather advisory for conditions that had occurred 3 days ago. I checked the town's public notice page online. Neither message corresponded to any current advisory. Both were outdated, reissued for no visible reason. I called the town hall number the next morning. The woman who answered listened to my description and was immediately puzzled. She said the alert system was automated and could not, to her knowledge, resend old messages. She said she'd look into it and call me back. She called back that afternoon and said she could find no record of alerts being sent to my number on those 2 nights. The system log showed no outbound calls at those times. I sat with that for a day. Then I pulled up the received calls on my phone and looked at the number again. It was close to the town alert number, the same area code and exchange, but not identical. 1 digit off. Someone had called me twice after midnight from a number crafted to look like the municipal alert system. The messages had been recorded. Whoever was calling had prepared audio, an imitation of the alert service's automated voice, and played it when I answered. I reported this to the local non-emergency line. The officer I spoke with had me document the calls in detail and noted it was an unusual situation. He asked me whether I'd had any concerning interactions with anyone recently. I hadn't that I could identify. But here is the part I hadn't mentioned yet, the piece that retroactively changed how I understood everything. The month before the call started, I'd noticed that my back porch light kept burning out. I'd replaced the bulb twice. The third time it went out, I climbed up to check the fixture and found that the bulb hadn't burned out at all. It had been loosened.
Not fully removed, just turned back in the socket enough to break contact. You couldn't tell from below. I replaced it and tightened it and moved on without connecting it to anything. The calls, I came to believe, were a way of checking whether I was home and whether I answered at midnight. The porch light had been a way of reducing visibility at the back of the house. Individually, each thing had an explanation. Together, they described a preparation. I brought both elements to the officer when I followed up. He agreed that the combination warranted more attention than either alone. The situation was documented as an ongoing concern. I had a security light with a battery backup installed on the back porch, started using an answering service to screen calls, and spent several weeks staying with a friend before I felt settled enough to be fully alone in the house again. The calls stopped. I never learned who made them. What I think about is the patience behind it. Someone had sourced a number similar enough to a public service line that I'd answer without hesitation. They'd made the calls late enough that I'd be home. They'd done it more than once to establish a pattern, and then, when it was noticed, they stopped. Quietly, completely, like they simply moved on. I don't find that reassuring.
I need to be clear about one thing before I tell this. I'm not someone who frightens easily. I mention that not to sound impressive, but because I think it matters for understanding how long I let this go on before I did anything. I kept finding ordinary explanations and accepting them, and each time I accepted one, I gave whatever was happening more time. I owned a small house on a half-acre lot in a rural adjacent community. A stretch of properties along a county road, each separated from the next by a few hundred feet of field or fence line or both. My nearest neighbor to the north was a farmer I'd waved to occasionally. My nearest to the south was an empty rental that turned over tenants slowly. Behind my property was an open field that ended at a tree line about 400 feet back. I had a dog, a medium-sized, good-natured animal named Herschel, who was reliably calm and not given to anxiety. I mention him because he became the most consistent indicator of something I kept trying to explain away. In August, Herschel began waking me at night. He was not a dog who did this. In 3 years of living with him, he'd woken me perhaps twice, both times for real reasons. A storm, a car that had pulled into the driveway. He slept on a bed near the window that looked out into the backyard, and he was quiet and settled almost every night. Starting in August, he began waking at roughly the same time, between 2 and 3 in the morning, and going to that window, not barking, standing at the glass, still and focused, staring out into the yard. The first 3 times I got up and looked, the yard was dark. The motion-activated floodlight on the back of the house had not triggered. I could see the field beyond the fence in the moonlight, and there was nothing visible. I told myself it was deer at the tree line, or a fox. Herschel could smell things I couldn't see. After the 6th or 7th time, I put a battery-powered trail camera on the fence post at the back of the yard, the kind used for wildlife monitoring, triggered by motion, low light capable. I set it up on a Friday evening and checked it Sunday morning. There were 22 triggered captures over those 2 nights. Most were empty frames where wind had moved the tall grass at the field edge. Several showed a deer near the tree line, which confirmed my working theory. 3 of the captures showed something else. In the first, at 2:17 a.m. on Saturday, a figure was visible at the far edge of my backyard, near the fence line, inside the fence line, standing still, facing the house. In the second, taken 11 minutes later, the figure was closer, perhaps 30 feet from the back of the house, still facing the house. The image quality was limited, but the posture was unmistakable, upright, deliberate, attentive. In the third, the yard was empty.
Whatever the figure's departure looked like, the camera hadn't captured it. I sat at my kitchen table with my phone and looked at those 3 images for a long time. Herschel sat next to me. He was quiet. I called the sheriff's non-emergency line and sent them the images. A deputy came out within 2 hours, walked the yard, examined the fence line, and found what I hadn't thought to look for. The grass near the fence had been compressed in a regular path along the back edge, the kind of wear that develops over repeated foot traffic rather than a single visit. Someone had been coming to the back of my yard regularly enough to leave a trace. The deputy recommended motion-activated lighting for the back fence line and suggested I vary any visible routines, window light timing when I let the dog out. He took the camera as part of his documentation. I had the lighting installed within the week. I asked the deputy when he returned the camera how long he thought this had been going on. He said the compression pattern in the grass was consistent with weeks of repeated presence, but he couldn't confirm a specific time frame. Weeks. While I'd been sleeping or watching television or reading at the kitchen table in the lit room with the windows that faced the backyard. Herschel had known for most of those weeks. He'd been standing at the glass, trying to tell me in the only language available to him, and I kept finding reasons to attribute it to deer. I had floodlighting installed along the entire back fence line within the month. I stopped leaving the kitchen windows lit after dark. I adopted different habits, small changes, each of which required me to acknowledge that the ordinary space behind my house had been, for some period of time, observed. The visit stopped after the lighting went in. Whether the person saw the new lights or the deputy's visit had some deterrent effect, I can't say. I never learned who it was. What I've kept from it is this. The animals that share our homes are paying attention in ways we've mostly stopped. Herschel wasn't anxious. He wasn't reactive. He stood at the window with a very specific kind of focus, the focus of an animal that knows exactly what it's looking at. I should have trusted that sooner than I did.